Hello and welcome back to The Path, the podcast from Lifestyle RX. Here again this week, joining me is Dr. Brendan Byrne. How are you doing this week?
I'm doing good. End of summer, still nice.
Excellent. Yeah, it hasn't started to get cold yet here, so hopefully it holds off for a bit longer. Okay, so in today's episode, we're talking all about CGMs. So as people who have gone through the Lifestyle RX program know, CGMs are one of the tools we use during the program. We currently have the ability to get everyone a free sample of a Freestyle Libre 2 CGM. So if you haven't got that, log into your where you do your homework, and it's in the first week, and you can get that. But we get a lot of questions about them, and they're somewhat of a confusing device sometimes. So we're going to go through how they are, what they do, some common questions, and hopefully clear up some of the confusion that might be around these devices. So I guess to get started, maybe we should go over who should use a CGM in the program and who's it most helpful for.
So it's definitely going to be most helpful for people with diabetes. So if you have normal blood sugars or pre-diabetes, it may be useful, and often there are insights. But if you have diabetes, it's going to be really, really useful. And so it shows different things depending on kind of the understanding of what's happening with your diabetes. So when you see us and you get your report from us, we'll give you kind of a status around kind of how your pancreas is doing and how much insulin resistance there is. That gives you special insight as well. So if your pancreas is kind of not performing up to normal, then you're going to find the CGM almost essential, right? So if you've got decreased pancreas function, you're going to be challenged by foods with carbohydrates in them, and you're going to need to have a tool that really allows you to understand, is that carb in that food too much, and does it get absorbed too quickly, and what happens? And there's no other tool like a CGM for that. So I think they're really useful for everyone with diabetes. I think pre-diabetes, you often get some insights. And then if you've got normal blood sugars, I don't think they're that useful. And I can talk a little bit more about that later if we want to get into that.
Cool. Okay. So one of the things that the data you can get out of a CGM is something called time and range, which basically gives you the percentage of time that you are within your range for your high and low blood sugar. So what's the difference between that time and range measurement and like an HbA1c that you would get as from some blood work?
Yeah, so the HbA1c or hemoglobin A1c is the gold standard for kind of understanding blood sugar control. And it's kind of a neat test because it uses kind of a quirk, kind of physiological quirk. And somebody, I should actually figure out who did this, because I'm always saying somebody figured this out. I should actually learn about this. But so what happens is hemoglobin is the the part of your red blood cell, the iron part of the red blood cell that carries oxygen. And somebody noticed that over time, glucose gets stuck to it. And so the red blood cells live on average 120 days. And if you can actually kind of figure out from that the amount of hemoglobin that has glucose stuck to it will correlate with the average blood sugars across that 120 days. So it's
pretty cool.
Yeah. So it's really quite clever. What's interesting is it's represented as a percentage. So the percentage of hemoglobin with glucose stuck to it. Those percentages often correlate fairly closely to fasting blood sugar. So often, if you're in the sixes with your hemoglobin A1C, you'll be in the sixes for fasting blood sugar, sevens and sevens. That's kind of coincidental. It actually isn't. So
it's measuring different things.
Yeah, they're totally measuring different things. We often refer to hemoglobin A1C as being this average blood sugar reading, and kind of in spirit it is, but obviously technically it's not. It's completely different. Mm-hmm. So it just simply represents the amount of hemoglobin that has a glucose stuck to it. So it essentially gives you one reading for the whole as kind of across the whole period of time. It doesn't really tell you how much how many bad highs you had or how many bad lows you had. So you can kind of imagine if your reading is 7.5, there are a lot of different ways that you could get to that 7.5.
Yeah.
You could have pretty good fasting blood sugar but have horrible control around your meals, or vice versa, or all sorts of combinations. And so, but it is our gold standard. It does give us this longer term blood glucose control perspective. Time and range does something kind of similar, but you're not dependent on the 120-day lifespan of the red blood cell, so you can look at it across 14 days or a shorter period of time. And it's simply saying, what's the percentage of time that your glucose is in the range of 3.9 to 10 millimoles per liter. And so you can look at that. You could look at it across 120 days if you wanted to. But obviously the sensor is a 2-week sensor. So generally you're going to look at it across the week or the 2 weeks in the report that you get. And so what's neat with that is you can see kind of, if you're in that range, it tells you, that you're not getting any, significant lows, and you're not getting any significant highs. So that's a little bit more granular than what you get with the hemoglobin A1C, right? Because if you get that hemoglobin A1C of 7.5, you actually don't know how much time you were high or low. You can, of course, see the change in time and range, between, when you start the program and 4 weeks into the program, you can see that change. And you'll notice, hey, at the beginning of the program, I was 78% time and range, and now I'm 99%. With your hemoglobin A1C, we really have to wait 120 days to get kind of a fully new result. So doing it a month later is going to be, mainly talking about the past before you made the change and only 1 month of that change. So it gives you that ability to kind of see that change, happen more quickly. What I find with it as well, it's great because we can actually start to adjust the range over time, and we can talk about that a little bit as when we start talking about kind of the what it is about the range. But so by and large, just to really simplify it, they're kind of measuring different things, but they give you a sense of blood sugar control across a longer period. Time and range is more granular in the sense that you can figure out kind of time high, time low, and then obviously the time within that range. So it gives you a little bit more information that way.
Cool. And then, is there a correlation between the time and range and the A1C, or are they like not connected at all?
So there's definitely a correlation, but it's just not a one-to-one relationship. And so it kind of goes back to that, you could get the same average, but do it completely differently, right? So some people can have huge variability, but land kind of with it, an average sugar, average, which an A1C of 7.5%. Other people could do it with a very flat curve, right? So there's different ways. And so you can't really say that if you're 99% time and range, that's going to mean that your A1C is going to be you can't predict it based off that. Again, kind of what you could imagine is you could be somebody that has, let's say you're somebody that has very high fasting blood sugars, but at meals you're remarkably well controlled. Your overall average is going to of high fasting blood sugars and kind of not getting very much spikes at your meal, still going to give you probably a higher hemoglobin A1C than somebody who has a lower kind of fasting but tends to spike out of range a few times a day, right? So that's where you can't quite see it being the same. That being said, and the correlation is there in the sense that if your time and range is improving, your hemoglobin A1C is likely improving as well. And so that's where you can start to think about it. So kind of in our program, what we really like is if somebody's wearing a CGM, they can actually see in week by week or 2 week by 2 week intervals that their time in range is improving. And as their time in range is improving, they'll know that their hemoglobin A1C is improving. And so we're only going to measure the hemoglobin A1C in 12 weeks, right? And so we don't get those interim measures, but this gives us a nice interim measure, and we can say, hey, if that's improving, then your A1C is definitely improving, and so that allows us to kind of proceed.
Cool, awesome. And then I know another thing that you can get inside the app is actually an estimated A1C. So
Yeah.
it'll try and calculate it. Is that accurate, or how does that work out?
So it's generally pretty close. My experience is kind of plus or minus 0.3. It often seems to be that it underestimates the hemoglobin A1C. And remember, the other factor, and I should have said this before with hemoglobin A1C, it's dependent on the red blood cell living for 120 days. That's the assumption. Not everybody's red blood cells live 120 days. So you could have red blood cells that live 130 days. By default, at the same level of blood sugars, you're going to have 10 more days for glucose to get stuck to the hemoglobin. And therefore your hemoglobin A1C is going to be a little bit higher than somebody at 120 days. Likewise, you can see it when somebody has kind of short living blood cells. I've had a patient before that was had a hemolytic anemia. So basically, was anemic and was turning over red blood cells very, very quickly. So his fasting blood sugar was 18, but his hemoglobin A1C was 4.7. So his blood cells were not living very long. So they didn't have a very long chance to get the glucose stuck to the hemoglobin. So that variability definitely feeds into the kind of the variability you're going to see between kind of what it's predicting and what you're actually getting. But then there's a little bit of a factor that just because it's an estimate and it's not really accounting for what that overall pattern is. So that being said, it's generally pretty close. And again, I think what we're most interested in with the CGMs is we start to see the trend, right?
Yeah.
So if you have a hemoglobin A1C of 6.8 and you start wearing a CGM and it says your hemoglobin A1C estimated is 6.5, hard to know how much different that is than your 6.8. But 2 weeks later, it starts saying it's a 6.3. Then 2 weeks after that, it says it's a 6.1. You're definitely improving. And if you're improving your time in range, that's going to translate into an improvement in your hemoglobin A1C. So we're headed the right direction.
Yeah.
Which, really what we're looking for from the device, just like from the lab test, is it's feedback on what you're doing. The point of it isn't to have good numbers. The point of it is that to get the feedback to know, hey, the meals that I'm eating, the amount that I'm fasting, the amount that I'm exercising, my sleep and my stress, all of that's leading to improvements in my underlying, blood sugar control.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, and then so for the time and range that we've been talking about, are just like generally using CGM, you can set a high and a low blood sugar. So I think it's by default it's 3.9 and 10, I think.
Yeah.
So does that mean it's okay for your sugar to be in that range? Like if it goes up to a 10, is that okay? Or how does that actually work?
Yeah. So again, it does depend whether you're diabetic, pre-diabetic, or have normal blood sugar. So probably the best way to break this apart is thinking about it from the standpoint of what happens when we test you, send you to the lab for an oral glucose tolerance test. We don't do these as much as we used to, but we do them if you're pregnant. So we'll usually do a screening one. We usually don't do the full 75 grams. But the test that we do for diabetics is you go to the lab fasted. So you have kind of usual fasting blood sugar.
Yeah.
Normal for fasting blood sugar is 5.6 millimoles, or is less than 5.6 millimoles, right? And so the pre-diabetic range in Canada, we define the pre-diabetic range as being between 6 and 6.5 millimoles per liter. Or sorry, 6 and 6.9 millimoles per liter. And then there's a range where we just kind of call it high normal, right? So you've got an elevated blood sugar, but it's not kind of in that what we call pre-diabetic range. And then diabetic range is going to be 7 millimoles per liter or above.
Yeah.
At 1 hour, so you fasted, you drink 75 grams of glucose, horrible stuff. You'd feel really horrible because it just really does give you an insulin rush.
Yeah.
And so if you're not diabetic, we would expect your blood sugar to not be higher than 7.8 millimoles per liter. If you're pre-diabetic, you might be kind of in the 7.8 to 11 millimoles per liter. And if you're diabetic, you might have it above 11. And so again, you can kind of see that range. Certainly, somebody who's normal is going to be time in range the complete time. If you're pre-diabetic, you actually can go up to 10 and still be kind of in that pre-diabetic range. So your 1 hour sugar could be 10. And so you kind of do have that, variability. At 2 hours, again, we expect kind of, if you're normal, that your blood sugar be less than 7.8. And then what we expect kind of, again, similar ranges for pre-diabetic and diabetic. So if we're seeing ranges above that at the end of the 2 hours. And so really kind of when you look at that 3.9 to 10, what it kind of shows to you is that if you're staying 100% within that range, then you're not really getting spikes that are being defined. Your spikes aren't being defined as above the diabetic range. So that's great. That means that the meals that you're eating are not causing blood sugar rises into the diabetic range.
Yeah.
And so that's obviously very attractive to us. It doesn't mean you're not overall in the diabetic range, because remember, your fasting blood sugar could still be high, right?
Yeah.
And so this really kind of gives takes us to this concept that's really important to understand, which is there are two things that determine our blood sugars at different times. So when we're eating meals, it very much is the meal that we're eating and the whole timing of what happens when we eat a meal in terms of disposing of the glucose that just came into our body. So there's kind of that meal, the blood sugar is related to your meals. And then there's what happens when you're not eating, right? So kind of the fasting physiology. So after you've eaten a meal and everything's packed away and stored away, it's your liver that's producing glucose. And you remember how much glucose is a normal blood sugar?
1 tablespoon, 1 teaspoon. Teaspoon.
So your liver kind of normally at rest when you're not moving around is going to produce a teaspoon every 30 minutes, about 2 teaspoons per hour. So it's chugging away doing that. What happens when you have got diabetes is you produce a little bit more sugar than that, and the liver is not responding properly to the insulin brake. So it kind of overshoots the mark a little bit. And that's really correlates with that fat that's in the liver. And that's the fat that we're trying to lose in the program. And so, so for us, when we look at this, we're trying to get rid of that fat in the liver. But obviously that's going to take time and it's going to correlate with weight loss. So it's not going to happen in the first 2 weeks, right? It's going to happen gradually over a course of, 12 weeks or longer. And so it's going to gradually be pulled there. But the other half of the equation, the blood sugar control related to meals, is certainly going to be addressable in a shorter period of time because you control what you eat. And so as you make the changes that we talk about in the program, getting rid of the fast, carbohydrates, the red light carbs, getting rid of the ultra processed foods, and learning about your yellow light carbs, what you're able to do is limit those spikes. And so, the first thing is, can we get to time and range? If you get to time and range, that's great, because that tells you that, really none of your blood sugar results were actually, from the spike went into the diabetic range, right?
Yeah.
And then from there, if you're 100% time and range, then usually what I like people to do is just start to lower it and start to, go from take their meter and reset their range between 3.9 and 9, and then try to shoot for kind of 100% within that range. and then gradually go down to 8. And then obviously if you're going down, if you're always with under 7.8, then you're actually completely normal in terms of your blood sugar control. That will be more possible if your fasting glucose is lower, because you're kind of starting from a lower baseline. You got a little bit more room to maneuver. But it's just such good feedback. You just start to see kind of which meals do you spike above that, which meals do you not, and you continue to work on those changes. So that's what's really interesting with the CGM is you get to see that curve. There's a lot to that spike, and it's something that you can't really learn otherwise, right? So if you're not wearing a CGM, it's very hard to know what's happening immediately after you eat. And and so when we look at people's curves, we look across the time of 2 hours, right? Because by 2 hours, you should be sort of back down into a pretty decent, pretty close to your fasting baseline, or just maybe a little bit above your fasting baseline. But if you think about it from the standpoint of, let's say it's your first meal in the morning. So you've been fasting overnight, your liver's happily kind of producing, a teaspoon every 30 minutes, and your fasting blood sugar is, let's say for our example, it's 7 millimoles per liter. So now you eat something, and a couple of things have to happen right away. So you eat something, it's got a bit of carbohydrate in it. That carbohydrate gets broken down into glucose. That glucose gets absorbed. That needs to actually kind of alert your body that, hey, carbs are coming in. We better shut the liver down, right?
Yeah.
Because, in the next 30 minutes, your liver is going to produce enough glucose to put your sugar to 12 if there's sugar coming in, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of this first phase, insulin release, and your body's got insulin ready to go for this. Now, if you've been a diabetic for a while, that first phase insulin release kind of peters out, and so often you don't have a very good first phase insulin release. So in the first 30 minutes, a lot of what you're seeing for people is actually just that the liver hasn't turned off, right? It's continuing to pump out glucose while there's glucose coming in from your meal. And so you get this rapid spike.
So you get both of them happening, yeah.
You've got both of them happening. After about 30 minutes, usually the liver starts getting a signal. It probably coming from the second phase of insulin release, where your beta cells in your pancreas are feverishly producing insulin. And so it takes a little bit longer to get there. So that first thing, if you eat, no matter what you eat, you always spike a little bit. That may just be your first phase insulin pass. First phase insulin release isn't very good.
Yeah.
From kind of the extent of that kind of initial rise and kind of up to an hour is really quite dependent on how much glucose is coming in and how quickly it's coming in. Right?
Yeah.
So, if you're having, pancakes with maple syrup, there's a lot of glucose coming, right?
Yeah.
And it's going to be really challenging to, turn that liver off, first of all, in the first 3 minutes, and get enough insulin to pack away all of that glucose that's coming at you, right?
Yeah.
So we learned a little bit about that. If, hopefully, after week 1, nobody's doing that. They've kind of really eliminated a lot of those carbs. Now we're kind of into the place where you start to see. So let's say you've gotten rid of all the red light carbs, you got rid of all the fast carbs. Now we're only dealing with green light carbs and yellow light carbs. What we're seeing there is that really probably your ability to absorb the carbohydrates, right? And then again, just how much carb is in the portion that you've just had. And so here again, you can start to look at it and say, if I have that portion of yellow light carbs, let's say it's brown rice, and you had kind of a quarter of a cup cooked brown rice, and lo and behold, you spike up to 11 with it. There's too much carb coming in too quickly for your body to deal with it. So you just decrease the portion. And the yellow light carbs, they're good foods, they're whole foods. There's
Hmm.
nothing wrong with them, but the portions depend on your ability to handle it. There is no other tool that we have that can tell you that answer,
Yeah.
right? So everything you see in our guidelines are they're suggested portions, but they I guarantee you they're wrong for you, right? A, because across the whole variety of foods, you're probably not average.
Yeah.
And B, it depends kind of on your pancreas function. So seeing that with the CGM and seeing that kind of second part of that spike where it goes to really does give you that a sense of, for that particular meal, that portion of carbohydrates I was able to handle or not. And if
Yeah.
if not, then you just kind of go and you make adjustments. And this is where I think that people get a lot of value from the CGM. They get that feedback,
Hmm.
they learn about it, they make some adjustments. If it's a food they really like, they decrease the portion further. They might make a substitution, and then you start to find that you get that. You limit the height of that spike. After an hour, it then kind of flips over to what your muscles do, right?
Hmm.
Because all that glucose has got to go someplace.
Yeah.
And so what we're relying on, if you're sitting down, if you're sedentary, we're relying on insulin to hit the insulin receptor on your muscle and pack 80 or 90% of that away into your muscle. And if your muscle either is full because you haven't been exercising, so there's no kind of room at the end to create, or the muscles just are so insulin resistant that they just can't do it, then that carb obviously doesn't get put in the muscle and it goes to the liver where it gets turned into fat.
Yeah.
So that we definitely don't want to have happen. So if you're seeing kind of that, you spike up, but it stays up there for like an hour or 2 hours, and it really has this long, slow decline. That really means your muscles aren't getting, they're not very good at kind of absorbing that glucose. There's a very quick trick or hack that you can do, which is go for a walk, right?
Yeah.
Moving the muscles, and you could do jumping jacks, you could do anything, but moving the muscles actually will let the glucose in. It
Mhm.
actually, the movement of muscle will move the glucose transporter to the top of the cell and allow glucose to come into the muscle. So that's a great trick. And for a lot of our patients, they'll actually start to do that, and they'll kind of do that, as they're experimenting with this, and they get, oh shoot, my sugar just went up to 11.
Yeah.
Go out for a walk and just kind of watch it plunge down, and you kind of get rid of that. The more exercise you do, the healthier your muscles are, the more easily your muscles are able to dispose of that glucose over
Yeah.
time. And so, really kind of within these curves, we just learn so much, right? And so sometimes people get frustrated because they want everything to be perfect. But the
Yeah.
purpose of our tool here isn't necessarily just to say that everything's perfect. In fact, if it's perfect, you don't really learn very much, which is kind of back to our, people who are not diabetic using these tools.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much it tells you, right? I mean, yes, if you spike, then sure, you can't have a Snicker bar and a 32-ounce Coke because you're going to spike your blood sugar, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if that tells us anything. I think you knew that before.
Yeah.
But if for a lot of people that are don't have diabetes, then they eat and they're able to handle it, right? There's a lot of insulin. Now, if we had a monitor that could tell you both the insulin release and the glucose release, that would be good for everybody, right? Because then there's a lot of rationale that you want to eat in such a way that you just don't need very much insulin.
Yeah.
Not surprisingly, what if we had such a device, it would coach you along the same direction that we're coaching you in this program, right? Really, if you look at kind of the 4+2 strategy, the first part of the strategy is eat to lower insulin. It's really eat to lower the requirement for insulin. So you're going to be able to see that.
Okay, awesome. We also went through all of the questions that patients have asked us before, and we have a few that are related to CGMs. So we're going to go through them in this episode. So first one we get here, and I know from doing the CGM sessions, I get this question a lot. So the alarm keeps going off at night saying my blood sugar is low. Why
Yeah.
is that happening?
Okay. So first of all, the big question is, are you on insulin or are you on a sulfonylurea medication like gliclazide or glyburide? Um, if you're not on insulin or not on a sulfonylurea, then you probably don't have anything to worry about from a clinically significant low blood sugar. Um, the reason the alarm is there, and is really what you're asking, the reason the alarm is there is these devices really are built for people who are on insulin, and we worry about the insulin that you just took might lower your blood sugar too far, and you might get into actually get into trouble with it and get a low blood sugar where you could pass out or even become comatose.
Mm-hmm.
So the alarms are the alarm and the sensor is very sensitive for these lows. In fact, I think it overestimates. So a lot of times you'll get it going off at 3.8. You'll check it, it's like 5.2. So that's not really low. That's why they go off at nighttime is just simply that they're very, very sensitive on the low end, and they kind of are a little bit, it's like a hair trigger. It's really trying to, make sure that you couldn't possibly be low. And so if you're not on insulin or not on a sulfonylurea, that low signal is really not worthwhile at all.
Yeah. And then what about the other alarms? I know that there's also a signal loss alarm and a too high alarm. People complain they get the signal loss alarm a lot at night too.
Yeah. Honestly, if you're not on insulin or sulfonylurea, turn them off, right?
Yeah.
Just turn them off. You can pick it up and see what the curves look like in the morning. You're going to be fine. And then if you are on insulin, I think the alarms are worthwhile. If you're on a sulfonylurea, it depends how tight your control's getting. Generally speaking, in our program, as you start getting fasting blood sugars, under 6, and you're on gliclazide or glyburide, you should have a discussion with your doctor or with your lifestyle RX doctor about maybe decreasing the dose or deprescribing them completely.
Sure. And one of the things we talk about is sleep. So you definitely don't want an alarm waking you up in the middle of the
I
night.
know. Yeah. It's you get the adrenaline and cortisol response to the
Yeah, exactly. And then the other question we get all the time is, why is whatever my CGM is telling me, like my instantaneous blood glucose level, why is that different from when I check it with my glucometer?
Yeah. So first of all, there's a big difference between what they're measuring, right? So the continuous glucose monitor is measuring interstitial fluid. So it's actually not the same as blood, right? So there's about a 20-minute lag between the blood sugar results in your blood and that interstitial fluid. So realistically, if you measured, you did a finger prick, you'd need to kind of measure 20 minutes later and see kind of where it is. So there is that difference. The other thing is that anytime you measure something, and I think a lot of us remember, junior high or high school physics, where you have to measure something independently 3 times. So you get the yardstick out, and you measure something that's 18.2 inches. You got to measure it 3 times independently, and then there's variability in every measurement we do, and so the bottom line with that is that the CGM and the glucometer both have a standard variability for which they're approved, and it's plus or minus 1 millimole per liter, so it's pretty high, right?
Yeah.
So if you think about it, even if you kind of the timing on the interstitial fluid versus capillary blood is similar, you get that timing kind of figured out. You could have your glucometer could be saying 4 and your CGM could be saying 6, and actually they're measuring the same thing. So that's obviously the extreme of that variability. But if you measure enough over time, you'll get a few outliers like that. So again, it's kind of that reminder that any of the numbers here, and I always kind of say the numbers in the program. So the numbers in the program are your glucometer, they're your CGM, they're your lab results, they're your weigh scale. They provide information. They're like the mileposts on our path or our journey. They're not the point. They tell you kind of direction, and so sometimes an individual signal might be wrong, But if all the signals are kind of wrong, then we kind of know, okay, something's going on. But usually what you'll see is you'll see kind of a progress of things headed the right direction. One or two of the readings might be off, right? You might kind of get a fasting blood sugar in the morning that, hey, that's high for some reason. But and you look at the trend across 30 days, you start to see that improvement. And so that's really kind of I think that the most important thing for people to kind of realize with the CGM or with measuring their blood sugars, is just look for the patterns. And then when you see a pattern, is it consistent with what you think should be happening, right? So if you've improved your nutrition and you're losing weight, then we would expect that the blood sugars related to your meals would be better, and we would expect that your fasting blood sugar should be coming down over time. And so you kind of look across 30 days, and if that's not happening, then that's a good time to follow up and say, okay, why isn't that happening? Is there something else going on? But by and large, I think what you'll see is kind of, if you're doing all the right things day in, day out, and you're kind of consistently working kind of what we teach in the program, you'll see that progress that tells you that you're on the path. And now it becomes the exercise is just being consistent and looking for small improvements, but being consistent overall.
For sure. Okay, I think that's all the time we had for today. So that was a great overview of the CGMs and everything. So that's quite useful. And I think we're going to do some specific case studies on a few CGM patients at some point in the future too. So
yeah, there were quite a number of people in the community that volunteered. I've got to go find their glucose reports, and I'll try to pick a number that are going to be interesting for discussion.
Cool. All right. Sounds good. So thank you so much for your time today and for listening. We appreciate it. If you know anyone that would benefit from the podcast, then send them a link. And if you have any questions about CGMs or anything else you want us to answer on a future episode, leave them in the comments on the community post or on YouTube, Facebook, wherever you're watching this, and we will find them there. So if you want to join the Lifestyle RX program, it's provincially covered in BC, Ontario, and Alberta, and you can sign up at lifestylерx.ca. All right. Thanks, Brendan, for joining us again today, and we'll see you all next week.
Bye.
Bye.